We're counting down the 20 forgotten deer camp items every American hunter packed before expensive gear took over. These were the tools that filled canvas packs and truck beds from the Adirondacks to the Ozarks, back when a hunter trusted wool, steel, and know-how instead of a credit card. From gear that lasted 40 seasons to camp rituals money can't buy, each entry marks a piece of a vanishing tradition. Which forgotten item tops the list? Let's begin with number 20. Number 20, canvas brush pants were the armor of the deer woods long before anyone stitched a logo onto stretch nylon. Cut from heavy cotton duck and faced with a second layer across the shins and thighs, these pants shrugged off greenbrier, blackberry, and the multiflora rose that ripped ordinary trousers to ribbons. A hunter could bust through a thicket that turned a lesser man back, and the fabric only grew softer and quieter with age. In the 1950s, a pair of duck's back or Filson tin pants cost around $6, a real sum for a working man, but they lasted a decade and then some. The waxed cotton stiffened in the cold and had to be broken in like a saddle. Fathers handed them down to sons who grew into them, the knees faded and the cuffs frayed by 100 cold mornings. They never breathed, never flexed, never claimed to, but they turned a briar patch into a shortcut, and a man in brush pants walked where others crawled. Today they survive mostly in old photographs in the backs of cedar closets, replaced by fabrics that cost triple and last a third as long. Number 19, the Catalytic hand warmer was a small brass miracle that lived in a chest pocket through a whole cold season. Fill the little John E. or Hacken case with lighter fluid, touch a match to the platinum-coated element, snap the lid shut, and slip it into a felt bag. For hours it put out a steady, flameless heat that could thaw a trigger finger gone numb on a January stand. A hunter carried one in each pocket and pressed his hands around them between glassing the ridge and rattling the horns. The units cost about $3 in the 1960s and ran all day on a few cents of fuel. They smelled faintly of naphtha, a scent that meant the woods and the waiting. Old-timers swore by keeping one down in a boot on the coldest sits. When the disposable air-activated packet arrived, cheap and single-use, the brass warmers went into junk drawers by the million. But those little cases could be refilled 1,000 times, and a man who kept his running never bought a warmer again. The throwaway packet won on convenience and lost on everything else, and the quiet brass burner became a curiosity instead of a companion. Number 18, the paper topographic map and the lensatic compass were once a deer hunter's entire navigation system, folded into a plastic bag and tucked against the small of the back. Before a glowing screen told a man exactly where he stood. He read the land itself, the tight brown contour lines that marked a steep bench, the blue thread of a creek bottom, the green wash of standing timber where the bucks bedded. A USGS quadrangle sheet cost around 50 cents at the ranger station, and a good silver or military compass ran a few dollars and lasted a lifetime. A hunter learned to shoot a bearing off a distant ridge, to pace his distance, to walk out in the dark by dead reckoning. Fathers taught sons to orient the map to north and trust it over instinct. The paper grew soft at the folds, marked up in grease pencil with the stands and the crossings, and the spot where the Big 8 was jumped 3 years running. When the handheld unit and then the phone arrived, whole generations stopped learning the country. The map that never needed batteries, never lost signal in the hollow, went quiet in a drawer, and a kind of woodsmanship faded with it. Number 17, the grease pencil and the paper tag were the humble instruments of the harvest, and every hunter kept them where he could reach them cold-handed. Before a season went sideways over a phone app and a cell signal that died in the timber, a man notched his paper license tag with a knife, dated it in the field, and tied it through the deer's ear or antler with a length of waxed string. The grease pencil, china marker, or lumber crayon rode in a shirt pocket, unbothered by rain or frost, writing where a ballpoint quit. A box of tags came with the license for a couple of dollars, and the ritual of filling one out with shaking, grateful hands was the closing note of a hunt. Old game wardens could read a season's story off a tag, the fold, the notch, the smear of blood at the corner. It cost almost nothing and asked only that a man remember to bring it. Today the tag is often a screen and a confirmation number, efficient and forgettable. But the paper tag, filled out kneeling beside a downed buck with breath fogging the air, carried a weight that no notification ever will. Number 16. Tinned sardines and potted meat were the field lunch of the American deer hunter, and they rode into the timber in a coat pocket next to a sleeve of saltine crackers. A hunter on an all-day sit could not slip back to camp without spoiling the woods, so he packed food that needed no cooking, no cooler, no fuss. A flat tin of sardines packed in mustard or oil cost a dime in the 1950s, peeled open with the little key, and delivered salt and fat that kept a man warm on the stand. Potted meat, Vienna sausages, and a hunk of hard cheese did the same work. He ate slow and quiet, watching the trail, wiping his knife on his pant leg. The tins were light, indestructible, and needed nothing but a pocket knife. There was a plainness to it that suited the woods, a meal with no packaging to rustle and no smell to carry. Modern hunters pack engineered energy bars and vacuum pouches now, and the humble sardine tin has slipped from the pack. But there are old-timers still who cannot smell mustard sardines without seeing a frost rime stand and the gray light of a November dawn. Number 15. The steel vacuum thermos was the beating heart of the morning stand, and a good one outlasted the truck that carried it. Long before insulated tumblers came in a rainbow of colors, a hunter filled a battered Stanley bottle with coffee at 4 in the morning, and it was still steaming at 10. The green hammer-tone Stanley, built like a section of pipe, could roll off a tailgate onto rock and keep working. It cost around $4 in the 1950s, a fair price for a tool that never quit. A man cracked the cup off the top, poured a careful measure so as not to spill, and wrapped cold hands around it while the woods came awake. That first sip on a freezing stand was one of the quiet luxuries of the whole season. The unbreakable liner and the heavy steel shell meant a thermos got handed from father to son, dented and scratched and trusted completely. Cheaper plastic bottles came and went, cracked and leaked and were thrown away. But the old steel Stanley just kept pouring hot coffee into cold mornings, decade after decade, asking nothing but to be filled the night before. Number 14. A deck of cards and a worn cribbage board were the entertainment of deer camp on the long nights when the lantern hissed and the rain drummed on the canvas. Before a phone glowed in every hand, hunters gathered around a plank table after supper and played pitch, euchre, or cribbage for pennies and pride. A deck cost 15 cents and a homemade cribbage board, drilled out of a chunk of scrap oak, cost nothing at all. The games ran late, fueled by camp coffee and the retelling of every miss and every monster that got away. Somebody always cheated or was accused of it, and the arguing was half the fun. The cards grew soft and dog-eared, held together with a rubber band, shuffled by hands that smelled of gun oil and wood smoke. A cribbage board carried the initials of men who had passed on, carved into the wood between the peg holes. These were the hours that made a camp a family, the friendships stitched together over a stacked deck. The glowing screen scattered all of that, sending men to separate corners with their separate distractions. But the old decks and boards still turn up in camp boxes, worn smooth by the best nights a man ever spent in the woods. Number 13. The Arkansas whetstone was the small gray tool that separated a real hunter from a man with a dull knife and a long night ahead. Before ceramic rods and diamond plates, a hunter kept a novaculite stone in a little wooden box, its surface polished smooth by years of use. A few drops of honing oil, a steady angle, and the patient scrape of steel over stone brought a blade back to shaving sharp. A good hard Arkansas stone cost a couple of dollars and lasted 3 lifetimes, wearing a gentle hollow where the knife had passed 10,000 times. A man learned the sound of a proper edge, the way a sharp knife whispered through hide instead of dragging. Fathers taught sons the angle by feel, the way you might teach a handshake. Dressing a deer with a dull knife was a miserable, dangerous chore, and every experienced hunter touched up his edge before he ever needed it. The stone traveled in the same pocket for 40 years, familiar as a wristwatch. Now a man buys a gadget that sharpens with a few pulls and never learns the craft. But the quiet ritual of oil and stone, of testing the edge against a thumbnail, was a skill worth having, and it faded when sharpening became a machine's job instead of a man's. Number 12. The white gas Coleman lantern was the sun of deer camp, and its hiss was the sound of the evening coming together. Before battery lanterns and headlamps, a hunter pumped up the tank, opened the valve, and touched a match to the delicate silk mantles that flared into a brilliant white light. That single lantern lit the whole wall tent, threw shadows against the canvas, and put out a welcome warmth on a cold night. A Coleman ran about $7 in the 1950s and burned for hours on a tank of fuel that cost pennies. The mantles were fragile as ash and had to be handled with care, and a man carried spares because a bumped lantern meant sitting in the dark. There was a whole liturgy to it: the pumping, the priming, the careful lighting, the adjusting of the flame to a steady glow. It hung from the ridgepole and gathered the men beneath it to eat and talk and clean their rifles. The soft LED lanterns that replaced it are safer and simpler, no question. But they never gave off that living hiss, that warmth, that circle of gold light that made a canvas tent feel like the center of the world. Number 11. The enameled percolator was how deer camp made coffee, and the smell of it was the true alarm clock of the season. Before drip machines and single-serve pods, a hunter filled a blue speckled percolator with water, spooned ground coffee into the metal basket, and set it on the stove to bubble and perk until the whole tent smelled like morning. A camp percolator cost a couple of dollars and would run on a wood stove, a Coleman burner, or a bed of coals with equal indifference. The coffee came out strong enough to float a horseshoe, and nobody complained, because weak coffee had no place in the woods. A man learned to listen for the pot's rhythm to slow, to judge by the color in the little glass knob on top. The grounds went into the fire, and the pot got rinsed and hung on a nail for the next dark morning. It never broke, never needed a filter you could run out of, never cared how cold it got. The programmable machine on the counter at home cannot follow a man into a wall tent, but the old percolator went anywhere, made coffee out of nothing but heat and patience, and started every hunt with the same honest smell. Number 10. The wool union suit was the first line of defense against a cold that could end a hunt before daylight. Before moisture-wicking base layers and merino blends sold in slick packaging, a hunter pulled on a one-piece suit of thick wool that covered him neck to ankle, buttons up the front, and the famous trapdoor in back. Even soaked with sweat or snow, wool held its warmth, and that was the whole secret of hunting cold before technical fabrics existed. A union suit cost a couple of dollars and itched like penance until a man got used to it, which he did, because the alternative was shivering on a stand. It went on over nothing, and everything went on over it. The foundation of a whole cold weather system built on wool, wool, and more wool. Grandfathers swore a man could fall through the ice and still walk home warm in good wool underwear. The suits were washed rarely and worn hard, developing a shape that fit their owner alone. Modern base layers are lighter and less scratchy, and they earn their keep. But wet wool still beats a cold soaking better than a man would expect, and the old union suit kept generations of hunters alive in weather that would have frozen them out of the woods. Number 9. All leather boots, greased by hand and resoled again and again, carried the American deer hunter for miles before anyone had heard of a synthetic membrane. Before waterproof liners and molded rubber, a hunter bought a pair of full-grain leather boots, broke them in over painful weeks, and then treated them like a member of the family. Every fall, he worked mink oil or snow seal into the leather by the stove, sealing the seams and softening the hide against the coming cold. A good pair of boots cost around $10 in the 1950s, a serious investment, and a cobbler could resole them for a fraction of that when the tread wore through. They molded to a man's feet until they fit like nothing off a shelf ever could. Wet leather had to be dried slow, never by the fire, or it would crack and ruin. A hunter who cared for his boots wore the same pair for 20 seasons and walked out of the woods with dry feet. The disposable boot, cheap and unrepairable, changed all that. But the old leather boots, greased and resoled and trusted, told the story of every mile in their creases, and a man knew every seam by heart. Number 8. The Manila drag rope was the plain, honest tool that turned a downed buck into meat on the pole, and every hunter had a coil of it in his pack. Before ratcheting deer carts and molded plastic sleds, a man tied a length of rough hemp rope around the antlers or the neck and hauled his deer out of the timber by hand and back. A hank of manila rope cost pennies at the hardware store and did 100 jobs around camp besides. Dragging a buck a half-mile through hardwoods was brutal, sweaty work, and a smart hunter cut a stout stick to tie across the rope for a handle that saved his hands. The rope hung stiff with cold and dried blood by season's end, and it got coiled and hung on the same nail every year. There was a shared labor to it, 2 men on a rope taking turns that bound a hunting party together. The wheeled cart and the lightweight sled made the drag easier, and nobody misses the aching shoulders. But that rope was simple, cheap, and never failed. And the long haul out with a good buck at the end of it was a hardship that made the story better in the telling. Number 7. The fixed blade carbon steel knife was the one tool a hunter would not leave camp without, riding on his belt in a worn leather sheath. Before stainless gut hooks and replaceable blade skinners, a man carried a simple carbon steel blade, a case, a schrade, or a shop-made knife ground from an old file. The steel took a wicked edge off an Arkansas stone and held it through dressing a deer, though it demanded a wipe of oil to keep the rust off. A solid hunting knife cost around $4 in the 1950s and was expected to last a lifetime and then get passed down. A man knew his knife the way he knew his own hand, its balance, its edge, the exact spot on the sheath that had gone soft with use. It skinned, it caped, it split the brisket, it whittled a drag handle and cut the sandwich at noon. The blade darkened with a patina that told its age. Folding lock blades and disposable blade knives took over for their convenience, and they cut fine. But the fixed carbon steel knife, sharpened by its owner and cared for like an heirloom, carried a trust that a throwaway blade never earned, and it was the last thing a hunter took off at night. Number 6. The canvas wall tent was the deer camp itself, a heavy cathedral of cotton duck raised in the timber every fall and struck every winter. Before nylon dome tents and camper trailers, a hunting party hauled in a canvas wall tent, cut poles from the woods, and pitched a shelter big enough to stand up in and stout enough to shed a foot of wet snow. A good wall tent cost $30 or $40 in the 1950s, a real outlay shared among the men, and it lasted 30 years with a little patching. The canvas breathed, so a stovepipe could run right through a fitted jack, and the whole thing warmed up like a cabin. It smelled of cotton and wood smoke and wet wool drying on a line strung across the ridgepole. Raising it was a ritual that opened the season, every man knowing his job, the whole camp taking shape by dark. The lightweight synthetic tents that replaced it pack smaller and pitch faster, and they have their place. But no dome tent ever became a home the way a canvas wall tent did, glowing from within on a cold night, the center of a world that existed for 1 week a year. Number 5. The cast iron skillet fed deer camp for 100 years and was very likely older than any man eating from it. Before non-stick coatings and packable titanium cookware, camp cooking happened in a black iron skillet, seasoned by decades of bacon grease and venison. A 12-inch Griswold or Wagner cost $1 or $2 new, and it was functionally immortal, passed down until nobody remembered who had bought it. It went straight onto the wood stove or into the coals and cooked the tenderloin from that morning's buck, dredged in flour and fried in butter while the whole camp gathered close. The iron held heat like nothing else, spreading it even across the pan, searing meat the way a cold, hungry man wanted it seared. It was never washed with soap, only wiped clean and oiled, its black surface slick as glass from years of care. Drop it, freeze it, leave it out in the rain, and it forgave everything. The featherweight camp cookware that replaced it is easier to carry, sure, but it will never cook a fresh backstrap the way that black skillet did, and it will never sit in a family for 4 generations, seasoned by every hunt that came before. Number 4. The wood-burning sheepherder stove was the soul of the wall tent, the small steel box that turned a canvas shelter into a warm home in the dead of winter. Before propane heaters and battery-warmed bags, a deer camp lived or died by its stove, a simple welded firebox with a flat top for the coffee and a pipe running up through the roof. A folding sheep herder stove cost around $15 in the 1950s, and a man fed it split hardwood he cut on site, waking through the night to add a log and keep the chill off. The stovetop cooked the meals, dried the soaked gloves and socks hung above it, and threw a heat that a man backed up to with a grateful groan. Somebody always drew the short straw and slept nearest it to tend the fire till dawn. The smell of wood smoke soaked into every stitch of clothing and became the smell of the whole season. The clean, quiet propane heaters that replaced it are safer and less work, no denying it. But nothing ever matched a hardwood fire crackling in an iron box while snow piled on the canvas, the light flickering through the seams, the camp warm and close against the cold. Number 3. The red and black plaid wool mackinaw was the uniform of the American deer hunter, as recognizable as a badge and warm as a wood stove. Before blaze orange synthetics and packable puffies, a hunter wore a heavy Woolrich or Johnson coat in the famous buffalo check, thick enough to stop the wind and quiet enough to slip through the timber without a whisper. A good mackinaw cost around $12 in the 1950s, a week's serious money, and it wore like iron, warm even when wet and soft with the years. The bold plaid was practical before orange laws, visible enough in the gray woods to keep a man from being mistaken for game. It smelled of wood smoke and gun oil and never quite lost it. Fathers wore them until the elbows went, then handed them to sons who wore them until the collars frayed, the coat carrying the shape and the story of two men. Lightweight technical jackets took over for their warmth to weight and their quiet, and they perform. But that red plaid mackinaw was the very picture of deer season. The coat in every old photograph on the tailgate, and a man who owned one felt like he belonged to something that stretched back 100 years. Number 2, open iron sights, the simple blade and buckhorn on a working rifle, were how the American hunter shot his deer for generations before glass took over. Before variable scopes and illuminated reticles, a man learned to line up the front bead in the rear notch and put it on the deer's shoulder, and he practiced until it was as natural as pointing a finger. Iron sights came standard on every deer rifle and added nothing to the price, and they never fogged, never lost zero from a bump, never went dark in the last legal light. A hunter who shot irons knew his range cold because he had to, and most shots in the eastern timber came inside 100 yards where irons were plenty. There was a directness to it, a rifle that was simply a rifle, quick to the shoulder and thick cover where a scope only got in the way. Fathers drilled the sight picture into sons on tin cans and paper plates all summer long. The scope, magnifying and precise, took over for good reason and made hunters deadlier at distance. But a whole arity of shooting was lost with the irons, a woodsman's skill of judging range and holding steady, and the plain rifle that pointed like a shotgun and never failed became a thing of the past. Number 1, the lever-action deer rifle, the Winchester Model 94, or the Marlin 336 in 30-30, crowned the American deer woods as the most beloved tool a hunter ever carried, and no gear on this list was passed down with more reverence. For over a century, it was simply the deer rifle, slim and light and fast, its wooden stock worn smooth by a grandfather's hands and a father's after him. A Model 94 cost around $70 in the 1950s, a real sacrifice for a working family, bought once and meant to last for generations, and it did. It carried flat and quick through the brush, threw a cartridge into the chamber with a sound every deer hunter knew in his bones, and dropped whitetails clean inside the ranges where most were shot. A boy's first buck almost always came with a borrowed lever gun, the right that made him a hunter in the eyes of the men. The rifle hung over the mantle between seasons, cleaned and oiled, half tool and half heirloom. Its every scratch a story. Modern bolt guns and synthetic stocks shoot flatter and farther, and they have earned their place in the field. But nothing ever replaced the feeling of a worn lever gun in cold hands, the weight of every hunter who carried it before, the quiet knowledge that a rifle could be both a tool and a piece of a family's soul. Across all 20 entries, from the humble brush pants to the treasured lever-action rifle, these forgotten deer camp items tell a story of self-reliance, craftsmanship, and the quiet bonds of the hunt. Some, like the wall tent and the wood stove, were the very walls and warmth of a vanished world. Others, like the whetstone and the iron sights, were skills a man carried in his hands. The common thread is durability and care, gear bought once and trusted for a lifetime, mended and greased and handed down instead of thrown away. Expensive modern equipment is lighter, warmer, and deadlier, and it has earned its place. But something was traded away in the bargain, a hard-won woodsmanship and a shared ritual that no credit card can buy back. So here's my question for you. Which of these did your father or grandfather still carry? Drop it in the comments, and if this brought back the smell of wood smoke and cold mornings, hit that subscribe button so we can keep these old traditions alive.